Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rotary Club of Greenville. I'm Wade Culp, and glad you are spending some time with us today. Please join me, if you would, in a prayer, and then that will be followed by our Pledge of Allegiance. Let us pray. Gracious God, in this holiday season, when we hear with joy the refrains of peace on earth, but mourn the lack of that peace in our world and in our community, help us to remember that peace begins in each of our hearts. And as St. Francis prayed, so make us instruments of that peace. Where there's hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned. Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be able to welcome our guests to Rotary today. And we've got just a couple, so you don't have to stand, but if you'll wave so we can see where you are, we would appreciate that. We have Rebecca West, who is the guest of Joel Jones. Rebecca? Hey, Rebecca, thank you. And Bridget Weidman, who is the guest of Matilde Knowles. Hi, Bridget. Okay, and were there any guests that did not check in at the guest table that we may have missed? Great. Join me in welcoming our guests today. Thank you.
So this is a privilege for me to be able to do twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, and we have such an extraordinary member with us today that we've made an exception, and we're going to do this today. Hey, Joel, can you come up here? Joel is in the process of turning blue today, and we're all very excited about this. Joel came to us a year ago, and he's been savoring the process, and he's done everything he needs to do, and hopefully he's met all of us in the process. George Fletcher brought him in, and George is right there, and we appreciate that as well. So without any further ado, Joel, here is your blue badge. You can give me that, and yeah, you have to give it back, and let's just give him a quick round of applause for his accomplishments. The last official duty of a past president is to chair a committee to select nominees for incoming board members for the following Rotary year, as well as to pick a secretary, who in the normal course of things will become secretary, then vice president, and or secretary, president-elect, and then president in due course. And I chaired that committee this year, which met in November. Spent a lot of time thinking through the active members of this club, and I think we've got a terrific slate that I would like to present to you. And I believe I can go ahead and, here are the names that we have chosen for secretary. And again, these are terms that will begin on July 1, 2024 and run, the secretary's term will run through June 30, 2025. And then we have selected Jeremy Hart, who after doing all this work for Greenville Holiday Village is still willing to take on additional responsibility. So Jeremy, you could stand. The committee has also identified 6 candidates to roll onto the board. Again, that will begin on July 1, 24, and they will be on for a 2-year term. And those 6 persons are, and if you'd like to stand when I call your name, Dave Carfelite, Luke Rhodes, Amy Randall, Brett Caldwell, Rusty Enfinger, and Stacy LaMonaco. On July 1, 24. The slate will be this. Roger Heitzig is our nominee for president. Christine Braswell Amin is our nominee for president-elect, and Jeremy Hart will be the nominee for secretary. So you can see where the leadership of this club is going. So are there any, though that is our slate, are there any nominees from the floor for any of these positions? Okay, I will entertain a nomination that motions be closed. Okay. All in favor of closing the floor for nominations? Okay. And I will entertain a motion. I think I can make this motion for the entire slate as presented to this club to be approved as presented. Matt, do I hear a second on that? Okay. I'll have a voice vote for all in favor of the slate as presented to be elected. Please say aye. Any opposed? Congratulations to all this group. We look forward to your leadership. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Attorney General Alan Wilson sends his regrets that he can't be here today. He's started feeling sick over the weekend. So Aryaa, who's here, that it probably happened at an office Christmas party. Fortunately for her, I think she was in the upstate working and was required to miss it. So we're fortunate that you weren't there and you might not have been here today either. The Attorney General is a friend to all of South Carolinians. He was elected in 2010, began serving in 2011, and he is the chief prosecutor in the state of South Carolina, chief security officer, chief lawyer for the state of South Carolina. And he looks out for us as citizens of South Carolina in areas like we're going to hear from today, human trafficking. And most importantly, I think sometimes, you think the South Carolina judicial system, you might hear that things don't work so well. His office successfully prosecuted Alec Murdaugh and was an example to the country of the South Carolina judicial system. So we all wish the Attorney General that he feels better quickly. Aryaa Regmi is here today. I asked Aryaa, she's been on the job, and she is the Human Traffic Program Coordinator for the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force, which is under the Attorney General's office. And I think we're going to be surprised in a way that we might not realize how prevalent human trafficking is, but thank the Attorney General and Aryaa for what they do to combat that most despicable thing that happens in our society. But I asked Aryaa, I said, you've been on the job 15 months, how do you like Columbia? And she said, well, it's no Greenville. So she said, and I think I spent some time down there too, Aryaa, and I think I agree with you. It's no Greenville. Aryaa has a master's from the University of Denver before she came to work at the Attorney General's office. And on behalf of the club, I just want to thank her for stepping in and being ready to stand in the shoes and to give us a presentation on human trafficking. Thank you for being here, Aryaa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm sorry I'm not the Attorney General, but he is feeling a bit under the weather. And I was not at the office Christmas party, so luckily I am here today. My presentation is up. So today I'm going to dive into Human Trafficking 101. We're going to go through the definitions and learn more about what is happening in our state, different cases and statistics and different scenarios as well. So in this presentation, the objectives are going through some common misconceptions. We know with social media, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we want to make sure that when you talk about human trafficking, you know exactly what you're talking about, myths versus the facts. And then we'll get into the definition and understand a bit more about human trafficking, and then finally end with some data and statistics in South Carolina. So this is the myth. We want to get away from using these scary, ominous, dark images of young children tied up I know mostly everyone's seen the movie, the Taken series. Oftentimes, kids are not just taken off the street. There's a long process that traffickers use. They'll groom them, they'll connect with them on social media through chat rooms. So why traffic humans? It is a market-driven criminal industry, high profits with low risk, profit from the exploitation of others, and people are reusable commodities that are safer to sell. Now we'll get into some of the common misconceptions. So first, a person must be physically moved in order to be a trafficking victim. We know this isn't the case. There's a difference between human trafficking, smuggling, and prostitution. In short case scenario, human trafficking is crime against an individual, and force, fraud, or coercion must be present. You'll hear me say force, fraud, and coercion quite often in this presentation, and we'll learn more about it a bit later. Smuggling is crime against the state, and it's typically voluntary, or crime against a border. Prostitution is adult commercial sex with no force, fraud, or coercion. So they're able to leave on their own free will, they have autonomy, whereas in trafficking, they are being forced to stay in that particular situation. Force, fraud, or coercion must be present when a minor engages in commercial sex. This is not true. Any minor recruited into commercial sex is a victim of human trafficking. A child cannot consent to commercial sex at any time. No force, fraud, or coercion is required in this case. Like I mentioned at the beginning, victims are not usually kidnapped or taken by force. How victims may be taken are, unfortunately, they know their trafficker. It may be a family member, a friend, an acquaintance, or a romantic partner. We like to call them the Romeo. They're groomed and manipulated. Online grooming and recruitment is the most common these days, especially with social media. They promise a glamorous life, modeling, the music industry, basically providing basic needs that are not being met in their own community or in their home life or with younger kids at school. Maybe they're being bullied, they're isolated, and traffickers will take advantage of this. I like to make a point of saying if a trafficker cannot easily pinpoint a vulnerability, they will make a vulnerability. A person must be physically confined to be a true trafficking victim. This is also not the case. A victim may have the ability to go out on their own, but they will have their quote unquote pimp or their trafficker close by. Confinement can be looked like beatings, rape, starvation, and so on, and as well as gaslighting, psychological manipulation, coercion, which will bring in shame and guilt to that person. Victims want to be rescued and readily identify as victims. Why victims may not want to be saved is they may think that they are in love with their trafficker. They may not self-identify as a victim. They may not know what human trafficking even is. They may fear retribution from trafficker or fearful of law enforcement. There's a guilt and shame aspect that goes into it, especially those from other communities. We see that a lot in East Asian women in the illicit massage business. And they may not be in possession of their identification documents, and this is most common with labor trafficking cases. So the definition of human trafficking, it is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor against their will, or when the individual induced to perform sex act is under 18 years of age. Anything of value. So according to federal law, a commercial sex act means any sex act on which anything of value is given to or received by any person. Anything of value could include food, a place to stay, paying for rent, shoes, gifts, getting their nails done. It can be anything. So this is the AMP model used most often in courts by our prosecutors. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 provides a framework to identify and help individuals who may have experienced human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime, and this model breaks it down into the 3 parts. The AMP model helps, especially in court, determine whether whether force, fraud, or coercion was present, and indicating whether the encounter was consensual or not. At a minimum, one element from each of these columns must be proven in court to establish a potential situation of human trafficking. The exception, of course, once again, is when minors under 18 years of old are induced into commercial sex. Even if the sex act or exchange never occur, solicitation for a commercial sex act alone may be considered as trafficking. So force, fraud, or coercion can take many forms. Most often, the easiest to prove is the force and fraud components, whereas coercion is much harder to prove. With coercion, we see psychological manipulation, gaslighting, constant grooming throughout the years, threats to the victim and or family, debt bondage, which is most common in labor trafficking, psychological abuse, shame, drugs and alcohol dependency. Obviously, with force, we know physical violence, including rape, restraint, and confinement. Fraud, we see this most often with labor trafficking cases as well. False offers of employment, promises of a marriage, a better life, or modeling career. So these are the trafficker grooming tactics. They will target the victim. Most oftentimes, they will find them online through Snapchat or different video game chat rooms. They will gain their trust by providing support and companionship, gaining trust and providing what is missing in that individual's life. They will slowly cut them off from their family and friends, isolating them. And then the exploitation starts. And then finally, with rewards and punishment, and through that psychological coercion, they will maintain control of that individual. So sex trafficking. Sex trafficking victims are manipulated or forced against their will to engage in sex acts for money. Sex traffickers might use violence, threats, manipulation, or the promise of love and affection to lure their victims. Truck stops, hotel rooms, rest areas, street corners, clubs, you name it, are just some of the places where victims are forced to sell sex. Red flags for sex trafficking are unexplained injuries, branding or tattoos, rolls of cash, multiple phones, sexually provocative clothing, unable to make decisions without approval, and then claim of an older boyfriend or girlfriend. So the most common types of sex trafficking in South Carolina that we see are, unfortunately, number one, familial trafficking. This is just an example of familial trafficking. I won't read it all, but most often it's either a mom or an uncle who is selling their child for sex. What I mentioned at the beginning is we have the Romeo effect or boyfriending. Basically, a man coming in saying, I will provide this, this, and this if you go out and sell sex for me. And most oftentimes, they will resort to violence. Next, we see forced labor. And you've heard me mention labor trafficking quite often. We have seen such an increase in labor trafficking in South Carolina. I have more statistics in a bit, in a few slides. But victims of forced labor can be found in factories, on farms, doing construction work, and more. Very often, victims are forced to manufacture or grow products that we use every day. Through forced fraud or coercion, victims are made to work for little or no pay. And then withholding of wages is called wage theft. Domestic servitude. There we go. Domestic servitude. So traffickers sometimes take a victim's identification papers and travel documents in order to limit their freedom. This is actually quite often. Victims of domestic servitude are hidden in plain sight, forced to work in homes across the United States. They are prisoners. They are working as nannies, maids, or domestic help in a household. So red flags for labor trafficking: working excessively long or unusual hours, oftentimes overnight, living where they work or in large groups, illicit massage businesses. Most of those women work at the massage parlor or live at the massage parlor. They are transported to and from work by their employer. Their identification documents are held by a third party, and they're not allowed to speak for themselves or stand up for themselves. And then the image is cut off, but fearful of law enforcement. So I just have two other examples of labor trafficking. So domestic work and marriage. A man from a conservative patriarchal society promises a poor girl's family he will marry and take care of her in the United States. Once here, the wife is forced to take care of the husband's children from another marriage, and so on. She has no money and does not speak the language. So there's a language barrier. There's cultural aspects that she does not know of. And her husband tells her complaining will only bring shame to her family back home. Recruitment, fees, and debt bondage. So I put this slide in here because this is the most often way employers or traffickers will recruit someone to come to the United States, or even in the United States, find people who want an easy, quote unquote, easy job and great pay. So someone from an indigenous community in Mexico learns on social media about a job here in the United States. The job comes with a legal temporary visa, and then coercion and control tactics are debt bondage. So the trafficker will say, I paid for your transportation, I'm paying for your food. So this is debt that is just going to keep increasing. No matter how much you work, no matter how much money you do accumulate, the debt will never be absolved. So I mentioned the illicit massage industry. It is one of the largest and most networked sex trafficking markets in the United States, consisting primarily of IMBs. These are massage businesses putting on the facade of a legitimate massage business to facilitate commercial sex services. So many of these venues are not just one business, but instead they're part of a much larger network out of Thailand, New York City, Los Angeles, and other major cities around the world. So on this next slide, we work closely with the network and South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. This number has actually decreased to 134, but there are 134 open and erotic IMBs in South Carolina. Obviously, SLED is aware of this, but as I mentioned, it is so hard to just go in and shut these businesses down because the main person is in Thailand. You must prove money laundering. You have to look at the cameras. You have to look at their taxes. So it takes years for prosecutors to be able to prove this. And on the map, it is a bit blurry, but most of the IMBs are in the Myrtle Beach area and unfortunately Greenville as well. So in short, every worker should have freedom of movement. No worker should pay for a job. No worker should be indebted or coerced to work. Who are the perpetrators? I won't name anyone on here, but I do want to say that a trafficker has no one face. Who is vulnerable? Risk factors include history of abuse and neglect, history of being in the child welfare system or DJJ involvement, history of mental health problems, substance abuse, foreign nationals with or without legal documentation, immigrants, history of dropout or not enrolled in school at all. Common human trafficking sites, hotels and motels, massage parlors, trucks, schools, you name it. And I've added the internet in red because the internet has become a scary place, as we all know. It can be used for great things, but it can also be used for terrible, scary things. And as of 2020, traffickers turn to the internet, making online platforms the top recruitment location for labor and sex trafficking. So due to this, out of our office, we have launched awareness and a prevention education curriculum. It is called Traffic Proof SC. We are working with South Carolina ETV to develop a curriculum that is age appropriate, that will start out at the middle and high school level for students. The curriculum includes human trafficking overview, staying safe online, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking. So to end the presentation, I'll go through some of the statistics we receive from the National Human Trafficking Hotline every year. These statistics are for last year. Our office is currently in the progress of going through the data for this year, and our annual report will be released on January 8th. And we'll have a press conference. So once we have that new data, it will be readily available online. But first, to begin with, this was the legislation that allowed the Attorney General to establish an interagency task force. These are some of our mandated task force memberships. We work closely with SLED, Department of Labor, LLR, Employment Workforce. And then these are our regional task forces. So we have 4 program coordinators. I work in the upstate. In the upstate, we have 3 active regional task forces. These are the upstate that covers Cherokee, Spartanburg, Greenville, and Pickens. And then we have the Foothills Regional Task Force that covers Anderson and Oconee counties. And then recently we launched the 8th Judicial Circuit with Solicitor Stumbo at the Greenwood County Courthouse. And this covers Abbeville, Greenwood, Newberry, and Lawrence counties. These are the state subcommittees. So we wanted to make sure that we hit all the different sectors. So we have data management and research, direct services for adults and minors, labor trafficking, faith-based healthcare, you name it. I support the survivor advisory, the labor trafficking subcommittee, data management and research, and higher education. So this was our report cover from last year. I have included a link. If you want to just go to our website, you can look more deeply into the report. This is the Human Trafficking Hotline poster that is mandated through legislation to be posted in these numerous locations. I did bring some posters out front and different resources. We even have some koozies with the Human Trafficking Hotline. So please take as much of the swag as you want. And then finally getting into the national hotline stats. So the top 5 counties who called into the National Human Trafficking Hotline, number 1 was Greenville. And I know the Attorney General makes a point to say this as well, and I do want to say this. So seeing Greenville at the top can be scary, but this is actually a good thing. This means that awareness and outreach is working, and these people know to call the hotline. They know what the number is, and so drastically Greenville increased to number 1 from last year. Number 2, Charleston. Number 3, Richland. Number 4, Horry. Number 5, Spartanburg. So the hotline data from last year showed us that 124 cases reported to the hotline, and this included 277 likely victims. So as I mentioned, we work closely with SLED, but before that, the notable findings, we saw a 450% increase in victims of labor trafficking from the previous year. And there was a 44% increase of victims who identify as Hispanic. So this is the data that SLED gave us. Most of the cases, the victims they work with are minors, unfortunately, and most of them are sex trafficking. So I wanted to end with some success stories. So DJ Kid, many of you may have seen this, but this was a huge win out of our office. Deputy Attorney General Heather and Assistant Attorney General Megan Raymer prosecuted the case for the state, but we know that he had around 80 to 90 minor victims. He was his Instagram is still up there. So if you look at it, he was meeting with rappers, well-known rappers, and he was alluring young women in saying, I will promise you, you know, a great music career. But we got him. So that's great. And next I put some of these headlines in. The first one you see is about Enrique and Elizabeth Balcazar. They are the pair accused of forcing excessive work. Next, we see the 6 people arrested and indicted in alleged illicit massage parlor operation. And then the image of the young gentleman you see is Chris Smith. He worked at J&J Cafeteria in Conway. He started at a young age washing dishes. Chris does have a cognitive intellectual disability. Bobby Edwards became his manager and stopped paying Chris. He forced him to work 100 hours or more per week. He physically harmed Chris. He verbally abused him and tortured him, isolated him from others. This went on for 6 years until one of his coworkers' moms noticed something and went to law enforcement. The former manager, Bobby Edwards, was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay nearly $273,000 in restitution. Court documents describe beatings with a belt and then using the hot tongs to burn him on the back. And then this is the Balcazar case that I was talking about. This happened probably 6 months ago. They owned Balcazar Nature Harvesting, and they had been sentenced in federal court for labor trafficking, withholding of passports, fraud, and foreign labor contracting. So I just wanted to put some of these cases to show that talking about human trafficking is important. Go out and educate others, dispel the myths when you see them. And then lastly, this is more recent. 2 women are facing charges in a labor trafficking case involving 4 children. Elvira Lopez Aguilar was one of the suspects. She was forcing her 4 children ages 11 to 16 to work at the Citadel Mall in, in Dorchester. The Dorchester County Sheriff's Office began to notice something after their schools reported that these children were malnourished, and they came to school with bruises on their body. So what you can do to help human trafficking and help the state task force, learn more about what human trafficking is, learn more about how it really works, help educate others, as I mentioned, dispel myths when you see them, volunteer in your community. Just having these meetings is great. Learning what organizations are in your community. Greenville has Jasmine Road, which is a great survivor-led organization. And then have hard conversations with your children about social media, about online safety, and then report to the national hotline. As I mentioned, I brought a bunch of stuff that's out there, and the hotline is all over. Please take as many as you can. Take them to your respective organizations, your schools, and you can always go to our website to learn more about what we're doing. If you want more sector-specific trainings, on illicit massage businesses, or how to apply for continued presence, or different H-2A, H-2B visas, legal services. We have different organizations that we can ask to come and speak about these matters to you. And you can contact me at my email, and I have business cards as well. But does anyone have any questions right now? Yes. Yeah, it's hard. We get that question a lot, and it's hard to answer it because we don't have the statistics to really look at that. But in South Carolina, we have seen such an increase in labor trafficking, and one may say this is because of all the illegal immigrants that are coming into our country. But on the reverse, we do say that labor trafficking has never been talked about as much as in our state and around the U.S. So that's why our office is trying actively to work with Department of Labor, Employment and Work, the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce, to just talk about child labor and know that there's different rules and regulations, because we have seen such an increase in child labor. I was talking at the table earlier about even with the different automobile factories and the BMW factory, they see child labor. And I work closely with Department of Labor, and one of the investigators say there's been Marco's Pizzas or Sonic's where it's been run by all minors. So it's important to remember that the minors are part of it as well. Yes. Yes, so that's a great question. SLED has its own immigration and human trafficking division, but we are advocating for more local law enforcement to all be trained on human trafficking. So I just recently, last week, I met with captain of the Greenville local law enforcement, and she does different trainings for her officers. So the local law enforcement may not have a division particularly for human trafficking. As we know, many organizations are understaffed. There's large turnovers. So that is mainly why our office is trying to get more law enforcement trainings in this upcoming year. We're planning on having 2 trainings in all 4 regions of the state and numerous counties to get more local law enforcement and state troopers to know about the red flags, to know the indicators. And with that, we think the statistics will only increase. Yes. Did you have a question? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So if you go to, so there's a flyer out there, but if you go to, no, it's not. But if you go to our website, there's a whole section about traffic proof SC. Right now, we're in the pilot stage. So we're trying to get into some schools in Columbia where the guidance counselors, the teachers will have a day just full of training. Right now, it is not readily available for the public, but if you go online, put in your information and request it, there will be a stage where we will start reaching out to the public or direct service providers who are interested or who may work in the field to look at the curriculum. But if you are asking for your own children, there are so many organizations online that do have curriculums. One of them is Thorn. They have a lot of internet safety, digital safety on ways to talk to your kids about, consent, or talk about if you're not comfortable with something, don't do that. But right now, our curriculum is geared towards schools. Yes, so DSS has a protocol. All minor victims, they have to be reported to law enforcement, SLED, so local law enforcement, SLED, and then Department of Social Services. And with that, a case will be formalized. Oftentimes, it's the family, the home environment that may not be safe. So there does come a time where are you going to preserve the family or get them out of the family? So it depends case by case. We have great victim advocates at our office at SLED. So the minors are well taken care of, and everything is victim-centered with a trauma-informed approach. And that's really what we want to advocate for. Yes. More from the law enforcement side. And it is, unfortunately, it's so hard to prosecute these cases. We want to keep in mind that victims may not want to even provide like a testimony. They may not want to go up on the stand and see their trafficker right there. So it takes years for the victim advocates to talk with the victims, to have the lawyers get a case, because it's so hard to prove coercion. Yes. No. So the numbers at the beginning, the 127 was just from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and SLED, the data is much more. So we do see that not everyone is calling in the hotline. But please take any of the papers out there. If you want my card, I brought a ton, and thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Regmi, for sharing this important message with us and for filling in at the last minute. We truly appreciate that, and it was a very important topic. Don't forget, I don't have one up here. There's one right there. Don't forget your blue cart buckets today. This is our only meeting for this month, and I am matching this month. That's all I'll say about it. I won't say put more in or put less in. Okay, thank you again to everybody who came out this past weekend at Kringle Holiday Village. It was great to see a lot of the people here that were there, and for the most part, we all stayed pretty warm and dry. Let's see, and what else? And our upcoming events. Okay, so the 15th, we're watching students at Alexander Elementary during lunch. Coffee and Conversation this month is on the 21st at 9:30 a.m. at Summer Moon Coffee. And as I said before, this is our only meeting for this month as we get into the holidays. However, our first meeting in January on the 9th is when the mayor will come, as he normally does, to kick off the new year. So hopefully we will see you all then. And we did get our book signed by our speaker to donate to Alexander Elementary School. And if we will all stand now, please, for the four-way test. And is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Meeting adjourned.